gotta tell you all a couple stories. First of all, I grew up in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and in Hardin County, Kentucky, there is a pretty large Amish population. And so it was nothing for us to go to McDonald's, for example, and have a horse and buggy tied up out there. And so you'd see the Amish out there, and it was just one of those common things. I had an uncle who had no qualms about meeting folks or just, talking to folks. And so he would see an Amish house and just drive up to it. And he'd just go introduce himself and say, hey, I'm here, can I buy some honey from you or something? And so he would just go up. He was crazy like that. He was weird. But the Amish, from what my experience has been, some of the most wonderful, hardworking people you've ever met. When I lived in Williamstown, when the Ark was being built, some of y'all got to go to the Ark and see the Ark encounter. There's a lot of woodworking there. Much of that was done by Mennonites and the Amish. And so they brought the Amish in. And so fortunately the guy with our church had a bunch of rental properties. And so the Amish would rent from him and they got to stay there. And we got to eat some of the best cooking you've ever had. Wow. And then, so that was always fun. And then the third thing is, we went on vacation to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. That is like the Mecca of Amish. And first of all, the best buffet you'll ever go to is in Lancaster County. It is miles and miles and miles of food. And it was so good. But we stayed there for about a week. Two things I remember about that trip. First of all, my truck, old Betsy out there, that's when she broke down. And for the first time where the rear end went out. What I remember about that is that we went to a Mennonite dealer or Mennonite auto mechanic by where our Airbnb was. And he cheated me out of a few $100s. The vacuum was making noises and he told me it was my tires. And I said, I just put new tires on there. Nope, it's your tires. And so I ended up buying new tires, didn't need them. And next day is when the truck broke down completely on the interstates, and my truck was stuck there for 4 months. So it was bad. So I didn't have a good opinion of the Mennonites for the most part. But also, what I remember about that trip is that my daughter Savannah was with us. And we'll talk about this here in a moment, but that the difference between a married Amish and a single Amish is beards. And so if you see a buggy full of young boys with no beards, it means they're single. And we were at a park, and there was this horse and buggy that drove by us, full of young boys. They drove back by us, full of young boys. They drove back by us. And they were trying to make little comments with Savannah. And so I thought, Savannah, I have no qualms about you marrying anybody, but man, don't you marry an Amish. You wouldn't last a minute. Oh, but so we get most of what we know about the Amish through movies and television series. How many of y'all saw like the movie Witness with Harrison Ford, and so one of the things I've loved, have y'all ever heard the music video done by Weird Al Yankovic called Amish Paradise? Have you heard it?
I know Weird Al.
You know Weird Al, okay. Don't do it now, but I want y'all to Google, when you get home, Amish Paradise, okay, by Weird Al Yankovic. It's based off a popular rap song called Gangster Paradise, but he does a spoof of it called Amish Paradise. This is living in Amish Paradise. I turned butter once or twice. It is hilarious, okay? But we have this idealistic image of the Amish, okay? But you know what? One of the things we learn about the Amish is that they're human too. And so there's been programs that have come on that show the darker side of some of the Amish communities. It's not all roses and all these great things. They end up having a lot of the same issues that we have, okay? Just there's not a lot of technology to broadcast it, okay? And then also that show, Amish Mafia, not too accurate, okay? So I hate to burst your bubble about that. So what we want to do today is talk about the Amish, because when we think about the Amish, we just think about how awkward they are, you know, because let me ask you this. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about the Amish?
Horse and buggy.
Horse and buggy, that's right. The way they dress,
No technology.
no technology. Yeah,
They raise all of their own birds and their
Yes.
own food, their own everything.
uh-huh. Some of the best food you'll eat, best crops that come up, most best manicured yards you've seen there, yeah. So we think about this, but we don't think too much about their beliefs. What is their beliefs? Where do they come from? You know, we always look at them like, oh my goodness, they're like those weird people. Do they come from outer space or something? Most of them are born in America. And so, in fact, we're going to learn tonight that most of the Amish community resides in America. Okay? It's almost non-existent outside the U.S. Let me show you this. Now, you can't see this very good. But you see there? So this is where most of your Amish are. So Pennsylvania and Ohio, that area right there has the largest amount. It's actually growing. You'll see Kentucky is this right there, so right below Missouri. So they have about, this in 2023, about 15,000 or 16,000. Texas is way down here, about 100 Amish, okay? So, but what's interesting, there's a large Amish community in Mexico. And so that is a strange thing to think about. But you see, they're kind of scattered about. Yes.
I can't see, is it Iowa up there?
Iowa, yes. Iowa is right below Kentucky. So
Okay.
Iowa has, let's see, right now, 9,930.
Okay.
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
Cedar Rapids.
And so, but for most people, when you think of where the Amish live, you think of Pennsylvania. And there's a reason for that. We'll talk about that. Ohio is right there with them, having neck and neck. In fact, when you go up to northeast of Ohio, large Amish community. And what's one of those interesting things, the Amish in Ohio, much more conservative than the Amish in Pennsylvania. So, and you think about conservative, I thought all Amish were conservative. Yeah. Different meanings of conservative and liberal. Okay, we'll talk about that. Okay. So, one of the things we'll talk about is, when we talk about the Amish, we think they got strange ways of doing things, technology, all the stuff. In their mind, they are being very biblical. They have a biblical basis for everything they do. So every practice they have, there's a biblical verse they will point to and say, this is why we do what we do. In fact, that mechanic shop that I went to, the Mennonites that cheated me out, they had a pamphlet that they passed out, Why I'm a Mennonite. And it had all the different Bible verses. And it made you feel like if you weren't doing what they were doing, then you were not being a good Christian. And so it kind of made you feel guilty for stuff. So let's ask, where do these Amish come from? Why do they believe what they believe? And it actually goes back to the Protestant Reformation. Okay? So y'all remember your church history? Catholic Church was selling indulgences, and Martin Luther said, this ain't right. And he came along and he said that we need to get back to what the true gospel is. Faith alone, saved by grace alone, the Bible alone. And he just went on where everybody's a believer. I mean, every believer is a priest. And so he got back to what he believed, what the gospel truly was. Well, that started the Protestant Reformation. Okay? Now you know that whenever you have a reformation or a movement, there's always that group who says, you're doing great, you just haven't gone far enough. So there's always a group that says, let's go further. And that is what we call the radical Reformation. Okay? So, one of the things that came from the Protestant Reformation was that not only did we have the priesthood of all believers, but Luther, Zwingli, and all that, they wanted a tighter connection between the church and the state. They thought the church should run the state. And that's why when you look about like some of the things like John Calvin, some of the things that he did, great theologian, awful leader. He used violence as a way to make people believe. And so there's a lot of bad things that happen. And he thought that you should not pay any little concern to church tradition, okay? So the radical reformers said, wait a minute, if all Christians are priests, why do we have to be connected to anybody? And so they were the group that came along and said, every church is autonomous. Every church is its own entity. Every church belongs to itself. And then also they said that if we are called to be holy, then we should separate ourselves from all secular activities. And so they said that we shouldn't be involved in the state. We should not be involved with any other groups. We should just be completely independent, informal, religious groups. Okay? And they said the government should have nothing to say about what goes on in the church. We have a lot of things that we practice today because of these radical reformers. So we've got to be great. I'm grateful for them. So two of these radical reformers was Felix Manz and Conrad Grebel. Okay, they formed a study group led by Zwingli. Zwingli was one of the reformers, and they was talking about we need to go further, further, further. Zwingli said, "You guys are crazy. You need to slow down." And they said, "No, we are right. You are wrong." And so they formed what was known as the Swiss Brethren Church in Switzerland, okay? And they became known as the Believers' Church, okay? Which at that time became a crime. Because Zwingli made his church the official church of Switzerland. And so anybody who formed their own church was then outside. And this is one of those lessons you learn from the Reformation, is that, and this goes with anything, whenever the person who wasn't in charge gets to be in charge, they start to act like the people who were in charge. And so those who persecuted people who didn't agree with them, when they got in power, they began to persecute people who didn't believe them. And so that's what happened with Protestant Reformation. One of the big things that they taught that was taboo at that time was the thing that most people today take for granted, and that's called believer's baptism. That you had to make a public confession of Christ first before you were baptized. And so anybody who had been baptized as an infant had to be rebaptized as an adult. And so they became known as the rebaptizers, or what we call them today, Anabaptist. And so that became the Anabaptist movement. And so one of the things that they big was about was that every church was self-governing, that membership in the church did not include kids. So the kids were no longer on the rolls, kids didn't count, kids were not included part of the church structure until they reached a certain age where they could be baptized. And when they're baptized, that's when they became first thing. Also, anything that reeked of church tradition was done away with. So it's church buildings, done away with. And so their thing was they met in homes. They thought that was biblical, And then if you did have to use a big building, it wasn't have a steeple, wasn't have all those fancy things. It was just supposed to be a meeting house. Okay? So all this is going to come into play. So, couple things. As this movement got going, some of them thought that it was their job, even though it was a separation of church and state, that they needed to run the state. And so a small group of Anabaptists tried to, in Germany, set up a theocracy, which means the church runs the government, which we'll hit on next week a little bit, because things we're going to talk about Christian nationalism comes into play. Well, that got the rulers mad. And so then, every time someone said Anabaptist, they associated that with, you're trying to take over. And so they began to be persecuted. The Anabaptists got persecuted more than any other group. More than Catholics, more than Protestants. They got hit by everybody. And their favorite means of torturing them was by drowning. Said, you want to be rebaptized? Here you go. Just don't come back up. Okay? And so the city-states that became Protestant, they actually had what they called Anabaptist hunters. And they would go around finding out who were the Anabaptists and pull them from their homes, torturing them and killing them. Okay? So the Anabaptists have a very bad relationship with the state, with society, with culture. Okay? So keep that in mind as we start talking about some more of this. Okay? So they grew in number, but one of the things they said is that they were a lay-oriented, non-liturgical, non-creedal church. Okay? And so the groups got together and they determined what are the 7 things that kind of separate us from everybody else. And so this became, and y'all, my German, my Dutch, all this stuff, I cannot pronounce names, so this became known as the Schlestheim Articles. I don't know if that sounds right. But here's what they were. 1, believer's baptism. Okay? It was only performed during adulthood. Those who practice this baptism, the opposition, were included. But they believe that a child does not have the knowledge of good and evil. They're innocent. So a child cannot sin. And so if a child cannot sin, then what's the point of being baptized? And so they never had to bother with that. Okay? Hey there. Hey. Okay? So, yeah. We're talking about the Amish. Yes. Yeah. And so their belief was that you had to be baptized as an adult. Second thing that they were really opposed to, that they were for, that other churches hated, they believed in church discipline. Okay? And they believed that if you did not obey the church, then you were to be publicly shamed. Okay? So here's the rule. If you slipped into and fell into error, you're warned twice in private. If they persisted, you were brought in front of the whole congregation and publicly shamed and then shunned. Okay? Which meant that they would bring you out, shame you, and then shun you, which meant all family members, all relatives, the whole community would no longer have anything to do with you. Okay? Now, that sounds pretty harsh, right? And we'll talk more about that. Only fellow believers who were baptized as adults were allowed to attend the Lord's Supper. Okay? So it wasn't like we have, where open communion, everybody can come and take communion. And what wasn't like in the Catholic Church, where anybody could come, where you had to be an actual Catholic, kids could come. No, you had to be an adult. And communion is only once or twice a year. Okay? We'll talk about that more. And then they pledged to separate themselves from the evil in the world. Okay? And again, there are biblical verses for all of this. Okay? But they take us to this logical conclusion. Okay? They were pacifists. Why? Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Love your enemy. And so they said that if that's what he said, then that's what we're gonna do. Now, many Amish will say they are not pacifists, because they said pacifists at times will mean that you have an opinion about certain things. What they would say is that they are non-violent. And so they just don't want, it's not just war that they're opposed to, they're opposed to harming anybody else. They just want to do no harm. You know the old joke about a man broke into an Amish house, and the Amish man had a gun pointed at him. And the guy said, "I thought you were Amish, I thought you didn't shoot people." He said, "I am Amish, I do not shoot, but you are standing in the place where I'm about to fire." And so, to go with this, they advocated a church-state separation. And that's not just removing yourself from politics. They said, remove yourself from any corrupting influence in the world. Okay? So you don't have anything that would make you dependent upon the outside world. Okay? Now I want you all to think about this. Are we dependent upon the state for our lives? What if, let's just say the state of Texas decided they were going to shut down the power grid?
Yep.
We'd be a mess, right? That's one of the reasons why the Amish don't have electricity, because they don't want to be dependent upon anybody else. And so, yeah. Yeah, plus it saves a lot of money. Okay. Members were not to give oaths. Again, that's faith in Christ. So, these things are what they said. This is kind of what separated them from everything else, and this is what guides the Amish today. Okay? So, the Anabaptists eventually started to morph into a more radical group, and they became the followers of a man by the name of Simons. And he basically took all the Anabaptist beliefs and just kind of said, this is what we hold true. So, what John Wesley is to Methodism, Simons, or Simmons, I'm going to say it, is to the Mennonites. So you see his name is Mennonites. So these Mennonites were followers of this guy, okay? And he just basically started to form this little Anabaptist group, and everybody followed him, and he became the main guy. Well, this guy over here, Jacob Ammon, or Almond, does that sound familiar? Amish, okay? He said that you are getting too liberal to this guy, and said you are just not being strict enough, and you are being too bad. And so what he wanted to do, he wanted to go back to some stricter ways of being a true Christian. And so a couple of things that the Amish disagreed with the Mennonites over was this: communion. Ammon wanted to do it twice a year. Mennonites wanted to do it once a year. And so they said and they were like, if it's once a year, if it's twice a year, become too familiar. People will just not enjoy it as much. Second thing is, Ammon wanted to reintroduce foot washing. So Amish practiced the sacrament or the ceremony of foot washing. And everybody was like, the other things were like, wait a minute, no, that's not big. But the big thing that got them is that this group, and man, by the time this guy started to go away, but the Mennonites were not shunning people enough. There was too much grace being shown. And so instead of being strict and harsh on folks, and disciplined, the Mennonites were like, yeah, you messed up. Yeah, but we love you anyway. The Amish were like, no. How dare you? You cannot do that. And so they said that you needed to go really strict on doing that. Now, some folks did disagree with that. And so when this thing happened, this wasn't like an automatic split. what happened is over time, you had people just start to drift over and become like more conservative over here and then more liberal over here. And so when you think about Mennonites and Amish, Mennonites are the more liberal Anabaptists, Amish are the more conservative, okay? So, if you go to Pennsylvania, you may see people who look like Amish, but they may have a splash of color in them. Mennonites. You will see people who dress like Amish, but they may drive a car. Okay?
Do Quakers fit anywhere in there?
No, Quakers are their own little thing. Yeah. And so they have a completely different belief system. And so, but the Quakers are often associated with them because when they were persecuted, they wanted to head to America. But in America, the same religious structural powers were in place. So you had, the Anglican Church, you had the Baptists and Methodists and all that. And so what happened is that you had them saying, how do we avoid being persecuted again? Well, there was a guy by the name of William Penn who was trying this new wonderful idea called religious liberty in a place called Pennsylvania. And so that's why in Pennsylvania you had groups like Quakers, you had the Amish, you had Mennonites. They all got there because they could go without being persecuted. And so they had that freedom. And so that's why they all kind of go back to that area. Okay? Now, it didn't last very long without having any issues. What happened is in Pennsylvania, you had, and you see this inside the notes, the French and Indian War, that they attacked the Amish. Why? Well, because Amish, one thing to learn about the Amish, they are very, and we're talking about why this is, but they were very frugal, hardworking, and grew great crops, made great stuff. And when you do that, guess what? People want what you have. And so people attack them. They got persecuted that way. Second thing, you had the Great Awakenings. Revivalists came through. And so you had this great emotional thing of people saying, hey, you have grace. And so this decimated the Amish community. The two biggest groups that hurt the Amish, Methodists and Baptists. Not by violence, but by revivals. And they would say, you can have a personal relationship with God. You can have the assurance of your salvation. When we talk about beliefs, we're going to learn about Amish do not have the assurance of salvation. Okay? And then third, they were pacifists. Okay? When the American Revolution hit, the Amish said, we're not involved with this. We will not pick up guns, we will not go to war, we will not fight. And so now you have these people saying, wait a minute, we're fighting for our freedom and our rights, and you won't help? Those who are not for us must be against us. And so they got attacked from both sides, the British and the Americans. Some other things that happened is when the new immigrants came in from Europe, they tended to be more liberal. Now, let me explain to you what the Anabaptists who came from Europe, how their liberalism was, okay? These deviations included wearing buttons on their coats, owning a piano, decorating their carriages, having dishes with patterns on them, and then dressing their kids in fancy clothes, okay? And so what happened then is that the more conservative groups said, if you will not abide by these strict rules, you cannot be a part of us. And they kicked them out. And so those people were kind of leaned over and became Mennonites. And then you had those who became the Amish. Now by 1880, and I want to get to the beliefs, because it's the beliefs thing, we had basically 5 groups of Amish, okay? We always think that they are all just one big group. There were 5 groups. The one we know the most about or most accustomed to is called the Old Order Amish. And they're basically what we think of the Amish now. And then the liberal Amishes became the Amish Mennonites. Now these are not Mennonites, these are Amish Mennonites, okay? This would be like if you had a very conservative Baptist, and they said, well, we're not as conservative as the strict Baptists, we are kind of got a little bit of Episcopalian in us. And so they would be the Baptist Episcopalians, okay? Well, this is what the Amish Mennonites are. And then you had a guy by the name of Bishop Eagley. And he was what we would call a charismatic. And so he said that every believer needs to have a spiritual experience, an awakening with God. So what we would call being born again. And the Amish were like, no, that's emotionalism. You don't need that. You just have the Bible, that's enough. And so he said everybody needs to have it. So he became the charismatic group within the Amish. Now, just think about that, what that looks like. A charismatic Amish. That group kind of died out not too long. And then you had a group called the Stuckley Amish, and that was where they said, we want to be really conservative, but we want to wear buttons too. And so, yeah.
How many times could you change?
Not very often. In fact, that's what they would talk about is, once you leave, you're kind of out. And it takes a real act of grace for them to come out. And so, this Stuckley Amish, they wanted to be more liberal in things, but not as liberal as the Amish Mennonites. And so they kind of became the thing. Now, the last group, which didn't last very long, but I love it, they became known as a group called the Sleeping Preacher Amish. Okay. And this was to counteract the revivalist. And so what the preachers in this group did is that they would have this spiritual experience. And so before they would preach, they would go into a sleep. And they would take a nap, and then they'd be awakened with a sermon. And so they'd wake up and just preach. Okay? See, we take naps after the sermon or during the sermon. They did it before. Okay? And so, but what's neat, as of 1992, this is the latest I could find, there were 3 sleeping preaching Amish communities in Arkansas. There are 4 in Illinois, 1 in Missouri, and 1 in Wisconsin. Okay, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I may try. I'm gonna try that. So, okay. So, couple of their beliefs. When you think about what the Amish believe, Anabaptists as a whole are very orthodox Christians. Their belief in things like the death of Jesus, about the Trinity, anything but the Bible, is basically what the whole church believes. Okay? So there's not a whole lot we can say about that differs from those beliefs. But there are some different beliefs. Now we're going to get to this in a moment. But one of the big things about their salvation is, and you hear me talk about this all the time, that you are saved by grace alone. And we accept that. And so you'll hear me preach that there is nothing you can do to earn your salvation or to keep your salvation. You are saved by the work of Jesus Christ. And so that's why it's not us who hold on to God, it's God who holds on to us. You know, it's He who holds on to us. The Amish don't see salvation as a one-time event where you give your life to Jesus Christ. They say it is a daily thing you do every day. You follow him and you walk with him. That sounds great. And we agree with that in many ways. That's why we believe in sanctification. But their thing is that they say no one can know if they're truly saved or not. Because you don't know until at the end of your life whether your good and bad outweigh each other. So it still becomes a matter of works. Did you do enough? Were you an obedient Amish? Did you follow the rules? Did you follow the church teachings? And so if you did not, what they say it is arrogant and prideful to claim certainty of your salvation. Okay? A couple other things that goes with this. The Amish believe that once you are baptized in the Amish church and then you decide to leave, you are excommunicated and you are no longer saved. So if you decide you no longer want to be Amish, you're no longer going to heaven. Okay? You're no longer part of that. And so because of this, that meant that a lot of the Amish, when Baptists or Methodists came along and saying, you are saved by grace and you can be saved and you can know you are saved. They're like, really? I can have that peace in my life? They said, give it to me. And I can use the telephone? So this is one of the reasons why the church became a problem. Couple other things that it may differ in beliefs. They believe that there needs to be a true separation of church and state. So you should not have anything involved with the state. Okay? Now, a lot of people have this misconception that Amish don't pay taxes. They do. They just don't pay Social Security or Medicaid tax. They pay income tax, they pay property tax, they pay sales tax. So just like any other. But that whole community is granted the role of clergy. And so like, I don't know if y'all do this, that as a pastor, if I wanted to, I could opt out of Social Security if I wanted to. I choose not to because, it'll hurt me in the end, but so because they do not want to be dependent. Also, when we as Christians and Protestants, the ultimate authority for us is, of course, God, Jesus, right? But we say the ultimate authority is the Bible. Amish say no. The ultimate authority is the church leadership. The church is what determines what the Bible says and implies it and interprets it. And so the leadership, the men of that community, rule with an iron fist. So if they say this is what's going to happen, you do not argue, you do not debate, you submit. Okay? And if you don't submit, you'll be publicly shamed. And it happens too often, guess what? You're out. And when you go out, you lose your salvation. Okay? Couple other things that they do not believe to be associated with the world. And they say that the world is called the English. So if you say that, you hear them say, polluted by the English, I'm not trying to do my Dutch accent. But they'll say English. That means the pagan world, the outside world. And so that's why they don't want to have anything to do with that. Also, they do not believe in evangelizing. They think that if God moves in a person to come, they'll come. They don't have to go and share the gospel. They don't have to go make disciples. That's not their role. Their role is to be obedient and do that. So they don't see that as a thing. And then the things that people think about the most is They're unspoken rules, okay? And that is called, I giggle whenever I read this. The unspoken rules each community has is called the Ordung. Ordung, okay? And those Ordungs vary from church to church and community to community. But they have general basic principles. So, a couple of things. Let's see up here. Greetings. Simple, direct greetings often involve eye contact and a handshake. This is how we do it. Dress codes. Emphasis on modesty and simplicity. Why? Don't draw attention to yourself. Okay? Just think about this. When y'all got dressed today, what was the intention behind you getting dressed?
To be cute.
What's that?
To be cute.
To be cute. Yeah. You want people to notice you, right? You know, because you probably got in the mirror and like, that doesn't look too good on me. No, take it off. The Amish would say, see, pride. You know how you fix that? Here's a black suit. Here's suspenders. Here's a hat. And so that's where it goes. Communication, direct and straightforward. Talk about that. Technology, kind of see that. Community. The Amish, one of the big things is they believe taking care of each other. Okay? We're going to look at this in a moment where we have a barn raising. If someone needs to have a barn raised, they will do it.
Yeah, until they deer hunt.
Until the deer.
They run out and raise a barn around it.
Yeah, but they'll make a community event. And so, whereas it would take us to raise a barn or build a house, you know, because we'd have like 5 or 6 guys there. They would have 150, 200 people come. And it's this big thing. And so they have it done within a day. So it's an amazing thing. And so we're going to talk about that. Okay. Clothing. Here's a little thing. So men's broad brim hats, suspenders. These are all things you kind of see kids, the folks wearing. What does this look like? When you all think about how the Puritans dressed, they haven't changed at all. Okay, they're still stuck back in that time here. So that's why you look at Amish, it's almost like a time warp. Okay? Now, let me look at this next one. Okay, yeah, I'll share that with y'all, another thing. Beards. Why do Amish have beards?
Mary.
They're married, yeah. But it's a biblical thing. It's the same reason why when we talk about the Jewish faith, why do Orthodox Jews have beards? Because the Bible says don't cut your facial hair. Okay? And so that's why they have beards. But the Amish have a special kind of beard, right? What's missing on an Amish beard? Mustache. Why? Because in England, guess what was required as part of the dress uniform for the military? They were to grow a mustache. You ever think about when you saw what the military, you look at old pictures, they'd always have that little handlebar mustache, you know? That was a symbol of the military. And so Amish said, we are not part of the military. Shave the mustache. And so that's why they do not have mustaches. It's a way to tell the world we are pacifist. We are not part of the military. Okay? So if y'all don't want to be part of the military, shave your mustache. Okay? Ladies, I hope that's not an issue. Also, you kind of see the things that it goes with a visible sign of being Amish. It starts to recognize. So when you see that, people think of it. And it became a symbol of humility. So an unkept big beard says that you don't care what you look like. And so even though there's big booklets on how to take care of your beard, the Amish will share with you. So, but I thought this was really neat. So if y'all see an Amish guy, especially if he's older and he doesn't have a beard, that means no lady like him. Okay? But again, most marriages are arranged by the leadership within the community. Okay, so that goes. Here's an example of a barn raising. As we kind of see how everybody just comes together and puts all this stuff there. Okay. All right. Now, before we get there. First of all, is there any questions about any of this?
So they are Christians.
Yes, they are Christians. Yes.
During the American Revolution, when they were getting attacked, that they would just be attacked
Yeah.
and not do anything?
No,
Okay.
they wouldn't fight. They would not fight back. Amish will not fight back. And whenever we talked about this a while back, that one of the greatest examples of forgiveness that we have witnessed in modern history is when a man went into an Amish schoolhouse and shot up the schoolhouse. And the response of the Amish was to take up a collection, go to his family, pay for his kids to go to school. Even though Amish don't go to school, they went and they forgave him. And they paid for his kids to go to school. They took care of his wife. Why? Because they believed that that's what Jesus would want them to do. So there's many aspects where they are we're like, we need to be more like the Amish. Okay? Couple other things before we get into some more beliefs. The Amish believe that taking your picture is a symbol of vanity and pride. And so it's also disobedient to the second commandment of making a graven image. And so that's why Amish do not like for you to take their picture. And so if you ever go to Pennsylvania or going like that, it's very rude for you to go up to an Amish and say, click, click, click. They take great offense at that. So, yeah. They won't hit you, so you don't have to worry about that.
The children don't go to school?
The children go to school, and so what they have a one-room schoolhouse that they go up until 8th grade, their version of 8th grade. But anything past the 8th grade is discouraged. Because after that, the men need to be, because that's the age where boys become men, they need to be in the fields, they need to be working, getting married, providing for their family. Okay? And so that's where they start doing that. Let me get before I get to this part. The one thing everybody likes to talk about when it comes to the Amish is the Rumspringa. Okay? That is basically where, when they turn 16, the young teenagers have to make a decision, because this is the age in which they would be baptized. Okay? So they need to make the decision. Do you want to truly be an Amish? Or do you want to go be part of the world? And so they had to decide which way they would go. And so one of the things that they would do is these kids have a chance, and each community sets standards, okay? Because like, I know you've probably seen shows and documentaries where Amish go out and they're drinking and smoking, all that. There are some communities who say, no, you don't get to do that. You may get to go to the movies. or you get to go wear fancy clothes, okay? So it lasts from a few months up to 2 years, but this is where you get to decide what you want to do. Because remember, giving your heart to Christ is not an emotional experience. It's not a one-time thing. You count the cost. You make a decision. Do you truly want to follow Christ with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength? If you don't want to do that, then you're not ready to be part of the Amish community. Okay? And so here's the things. You have freedom within limits. You still have to respect. Okay? But before you come back, you have to repent for every little thing that you did, because you're fixing to be baptized. Now, what's interesting about this, what would y'all guess would be the percentage of Amish teenagers who go out and live a wild life who decide to come back become Amish?
15%.
15%?
80 and
It's about 90% of the kids come back. In fact, they say, the way y'all live is crazy. Y'all have so much stress. Y'all have so many worries. Y'all have, you don't care for one another. Your families are tearing apart. And they're like, why would you want to live like this? And so they come back. And then from that point on, that's when they start to truly become truly Amish. Okay? Now worship. The Amish have a hymn book. Okay? And it's hymns from back way when. So you're not going to hear any Chris Tomlin hymns. Okay? You're not going to hear any modern day songs. In Mennonite churches you will, but not inside the Amish. The Amish have church services once every 2 weeks. In between those church services, they either go to a person's house or they go into another Amish church so they can be together. And so, I don't know if y'all remember back in the olden days, in a community, you might have a Baptist church, a Methodist church, a Presbyterian church, and Anglican church. A lot of times, no one church could afford to have their own preacher. And so they'd be in a circuit. And so, on this Sunday, everybody was Baptist. On this Sunday, everybody was Methodist. On this Sunday, everybody was Presbyterian. Well, the Amish kind of do that. They just go from place to place. But every other week, they pick a different community to go to. And so that's why they stay connected. But, yeah.
Is there a certain preacher, or do the men just preach?
The men just preach, but there is certain people who are picked. So, you'll see inside your handout, I think I have this other, yeah. There's 4 church offices. First of all, you have what is known as, and I'm not going to say these names, I can't pronounce them, but what we would call a bishop, okay? So he is the spiritual leader. He is the main guy in charge. And so he would be the pope of the community, of the church, okay? So he is the one who does the discipline and takes care of everything. Then you would have the servant of the book, and that would be what we would call the preacher, okay? And a lot of times you'd have 2 men, okay? And then you'd have what we call the servant of the poor, which would be like, if y'all are the deacon, or what we call like those who serve on committees in our church. And then you have his assistant. So there's 4 offices, okay? Now, how do these people get called to these positions? Well, when they have communion, they have a church meeting. And they'll say, okay, who do you think should be our bishop? They'll say, Yoderheim. And they would say, yay? He says, yay. And so they would just choose these people. Now, once you're ordained for life. Doesn't mean you would hold that office for that long, but you would have that ordination, so you'd be chosen to do that, okay? And then, if it's more than one person, that people are like, it's a tie between, this Amish, that Amish, who's going to be the preacher, they would draw lots. Or what we like call pick straws. Okay? So you get to be the preacher. So they're preaching, they're not educated preachers, no theology study, no seminary. They're just the men in the community. But their life is so disciplined, I guarantee you, they know the Bible better than 98% of the preachers out there today. Okay? And so that's how they do. And so, let me go back to a couple things. Some things about their music, all voices, so there's no instruments, not even a piano. Okay? But again, just like the classic Church of Christ, some of the best harmony and singing you'll ever hear. Okay? especially in the Amish community, it's expected men to be the leaders of the church, okay? So you know what that means in church? Guess what men do? Men sing. Okay, we can learn from that, okay? Guys, everybody sings together, and like it says that when they sing, it's very slow and reverent. Why? It's not supposed to be emotional. It's supposed to be worshipful. You're giving God the glory. You're not trying to work yourself up. For y'all who know music, shape notes, I have no clue what shape notes are, but it's heartfelt, okay? All right? Couple other things that speak about the language is the Pennsylvania Dutch, so it's a German dialect, okay? Marriage, they is not officially arranged marriages, but it's approved marriages. Okay, so the community, the leadership has to say, yes, we agree with this. Okay, and so everything comes from the top down. Okay, so everything is structured by that. Okay, a couple other things I was going to mention. Oh no, we already spoke about all that. Couple things. Since they don't have the assurance of salvation, how do you show that you are saved? Well, you do it by obedience and by hard work. And so if I can show you how committed I am, if I can show you how industrious I am, how hardworking I am, guess what that means? I'm saved. Okay? What is the Amish known for? Furniture, work ethic, excellence. Why? That shows how godly they are. And God is glorified in their work. And so when you think about an Amish woman making a pie, she's not just not making a pie to give to her family, it's to glorify God. And you do your very best. Okay? When you make that piece of furniture, you do it to glorify God. Make very best. Right. All right, do y'all have any questions?
Was the Stickley Furniture Group Amish?
I'm not sure. I have no clue who the Stickley.
Because they died out and they were in that Pennsylvania area.
It might have been. You know, and that's one thing a lot of folks don't realize is that the Amish, you know, they sell stuff to everybody. In fact, up in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, sometimes the Amish don't have a great reputation with a lot of the community members. Why? If I own a construction business and I give you a price to build a house, and then all of a sudden here's these Mennonites or these Amish, and they don't have to use the same things or pay the same bills I do, well then all of a sudden they come in and undercut you. And so they take away the business.
Do they make their own clothes?
They make, everything is made. They don't get anything from anybody else. So
Do they have a sewing machine?
it's not powered. And so not that I've seen anyone, an actual machine.
Can they have a treadle or just?
I'm guessing they have a treadle thing because, oh my God, if y'all saw the quilts from the Amish, oh, gorgeous. Yeah.
They don't use buttons in their clothing.
No.
And I've
Mm-mm.
seen girls show how they do their dress.
Yeah.
And it's more like a wrap dress, and to keep it closed, they use straight pins.
Yeah. Weird. And that's one of the reasons, you know,
Straight pins.
one of the ways you can tell the difference between an Amish and a Mennonite is if they have buttons. And you tell how liberal a Mennonite is by how colorful their buttons are. If they had design on it, oh my goodness, they're yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You were talking about the language of Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yes.
And you said something.
Oh, it's a German dialect. And so, yeah.
Up in I guess northeastern Indiana, a lot of Amish and, the buggies and whatnot. And they're big horse traders up there, they draw horses.
Mm-hmm.
She was, can't remember all names, Permerons and, anyway, they make a lot of money off of, these big horses
Mm-hmm.
for show, mostly.
Yeah.
And they have poles where the horses pull tremendous weights
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It is. Yeah, and one of the things I thought was neat, when we went up there to the Lancaster County, the Mennonite there told us, because we was talking about how beautiful the yards were. I mean, everything was gorgeous. And then we noticed that none of the men were out in the yards working. The men worked on the farms. The ladies did the yard work. And so the ladies did all the flower beds and the mowing of the yards and taking care of the fences and all that. I thought, oh man, because we saw one lady, man, she was pretty rough looking. And but she was out there just pushing a little thing. It wasn't a mower. I mean, it was a mower, but it was like the old Yeti. So, okay, real quick, I know our time's up. We went there because up in Lancaster County, if you ever get a chance to go up to Lancaster County, it is amazing. It is some of the most peaceful times you'll ever have. One thing though that you'll get you think it's like, oh, so neat, you see a horse and buggy, it's so sweet. It gets old after a while. When you are stuck in a 2-lane road behind a horse and buggy, it's frustrating. But one of the things that I thought was so neat, there's all these little stores, Amish stores, and they sell root beer. And I don't know if y'all have heard that Amish root beer is supposed to be the best, okay? So we found this one store, we went into it, and there was this heavy-set, old Amish lady, and she had the grouchiest, grumpiest look on her. I mean, she hated everybody, you can tell her. And so we came in there and we said, do you have any root beer? Yeah. Made some this morning. I said, is it any good? No. and we laughed at okay? And so he goes, it's over there. And so we bought the biggest bottle because it was in a big jug, okay? We got it outside of the car. She wasn't lying. And y'all, that thing tastes like pure whiskey. It had fermented. It was terrible. And we laughed about that. Denise's mom was with us, and she said, you know what? The Amish are honest. She told us it didn't taste good, and we didn't believe her. And so if you go to the Amish store, they tell you something's not good, believe them, okay?
Ness got a good story.
Yeah.
There's an Amish store between here and Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And so my parents would drive back and forth and they pull in their dad always bought bread. Well, one day he asked the girl if she could slice it for him. And he thought she was just gonna run it through the machine. Well, she gets out a knife and starts slicing. And my mom was just going, oh, I can't.
Oh, goodness. Oh. All right, now, one thing that I have to close that, we always look at the Amish as kind of awkward, weird. My heart aches because they don't have the assurance that we have. To me, if I thought that every day I might lose my salvation, I'd be a nervous wreck. Because I know what a fallen creature I am. And I know that it's only by the grace of God that I'm saved, it's only by the grace of God that I'm kept. And so that hurts me to think that they live with that constant anxiety. But you have to admire their discipline and the willingness of what they are willing to sacrifice for the sake of Christ. Their obedience to their beliefs. And so that's where a group like this, we say, well, I don't think I'm quite as ready to go and live off the grid and do all this. But there are certain aspects that we can take from them and say, okay, how can I be more obedient to who God's called me to be, and to live into what God's called me to do. Okay? Right. Any other questions or comments?
Would they build another church of another religion?
No. They, well, they would help. That's one thing, that they are very helpful folks. And, but, again, they don't really see us as believers. I mean, they see us as Christians, but we are not saved because we are not following the path. Okay? And so, yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay, next week will be our last lesson, okay, before the new year, and we're going to talk about Christian nationalism, okay? And so I know it's a touchy topic for a lot of folks, but we're going to look at that intersection between politics and faith. And when does religion take over politics, and when does politics take over religion? Okay? I think it's very, very applicable to our society today, okay?